And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Banner Monday, where we kick off each week by doing what IU fans love more than anything else, talking hoops. IU hoops, Big Ten hoops, deep dives into basketball strategy and concepts, plus previews of IU's upcoming opponent. We do it all here every Monday, and we are happy to have you here with us. This is the 4th edition of Banner Monday, and it is our 439th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the afternoon of Monday, November 12th, 2018. I am your host, Jerod Morris. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud Banner Moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Smart takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This week's banner moment occurred on Friday evening when the buzzer sounded on Indiana's victory over Montana State, with the visiting Bobcats totaling just 35 points on the scoreboard. And while the defense was far from perfect, there were some lapses and some openings that a more skilled opponent would have taken easy advantage of. The bottom line is that Friday night was yet another step in the direction of this Indiana program forging an identity built on defense. You'll recall that Archie Miller exited Indiana's 49-point victory over Chicago State, in which Indiana gave up just 55 points, visibly perturbed about the defense. He called his team out publicly, surely had a few more choice words for them privately, and then his team responded the next time out with a historic defensive performance. We can nitpick the warts and lapses all we want, but it's been more than 45 years since IU held an opponent to fewer points than Montana State's 35. That's impressive, and it's an important early season sign of a coach and his team being on the same page. That bodes well for this group's continued growth and development moving forward. All right, now, currently, I am without a co-host, as Ryan is not here. So he usually joins me for the mailbag, for the Banner Monday mailbag, but he is not here with us today, so I'm not. Something might have come up. He might pop on with us here a little bit later, but I will be happy to answer some questions, go through this mailbag. So we will start out there. We also have our Big Ten Roundup coming up with Mike DeCourcy. We have Basketball 201 with Ben Ladner coming up after that, where we're going to talk about the packline a little bit more in terms of three-point defense, and then also talk about Indiana's zone offense against Montana State. And then we have our opponent preview with Josh Wilson from the Inside Out podcast, who will break down Marquette for us. So all of that coming here on Banner Monday. And let's start out. Let's just get to a question real quick. I'll tell you about SeatGeek here in a minute. But let's get to some of these questions. So we got a question here from Jeff. He says, who do you think is the leading candidate for breakout player or sixth man on this very deep roster? So, this is the kind of question that we got a lot in the offseason. I suppose it's interesting to revisit now that we've been able to see a couple of games, although I continue to think that we need to not overreact to what we've seen. Continue to remember, I think Montana State right now is ranked 299th in KenPom. Chicago State, down in the 240s, somewhere in there in KenPom. So these are not good teams. We're going to learn a lot more about Indiana this week against Marquette and Arkansas. With that said, we've at least been able to see some live action. So I think, what Romeo's done, we expected. We know what to expect from Juwan. Justin was such a common answer to this question in the offseason that I don't want to go there, although I will say that I was very, very impressed with his play against Montana State. I thought he was outstanding. I think the breakout player so far has been Rob Finney. He's a guy who has been thrust into the starting lineup before anybody thought. Perhaps that was because of Devontae's injury, or perhaps that was going to happen anyway. I suppose we don't really know that. But he's looked good, and we're going to have to see him against, bigger, tougher, quicker, more experienced players than what he's had to play so far. But his poise has been, really good. His defense has been strong, and he shot the ball very well against Montana State. So I think he would be the guy that you would look at as a breakout player, making Indiana fans feel, confident and good about their point guard situation for the first time in a while. So he would go in there. And then, in terms of sixth man, then I think we expected good things from Evan Fitzner, but I think he's been even better through 2 games than we thought. The shooting has been good. His ability to make some shots down low has been good. Although, again, hasn't really been facing the type of size and quickness that could give him more trouble. And the same thing is true on the defensive end. We've got to see him guard, top 25 type players to really know what he's going to be. but just how hard he's played, the maturity that he's displayed, his ability to just kind of come right in and be a seamless fit on a new roster, that all bodes really well. So, I think Robert and Evan were two guys that we were expecting a lot from, but it's nice to see them be able to go out there and do it and to even play better through 2 games than you would have expected. And I'll tell you another guy that's just interesting to keep an eye on. I'm not saying that we need to adjust our preseason expectations for him or that he's going to become a big part of this rotation, but I have liked what I've seen so far from Clifton Moore. Obviously he's just bigger, in terms of stature. He's always kind of looked the part, but he even looks the part more now. He seems more comfortable out there on the court. His movements seem a little bit more fluid. It's like he's thinking less and just kind of reacting to the moment a little bit more. Had a nice little hook shot. So he's showing some things. Now, again, a guy like him, we've got to see it, when the games speed up and the talent gets a little bit better. But I'm not sure he really could have done more with the minutes that he's gotten. And what it shows is just the difference in overall roster depth. Now Clifton Moore is a guy at the end of the bench that, kind of gets in if the game is a laughable result. And that's a big improvement over your Tim Prillers and your Jeremiah Aprils and other guys that didn't really have a place on a Big Ten roster. That's not Clifton Moore. He clearly has a place, has a lot of potential, is still a guy that I think, could do some things in this program. And so it's been nice to see him step up and play well. Whether it leads to him being a breakout or anything like that, I don't know. But I just thought this question was a good place to mention Clifton, just kind of give him some kudos for playing better here with the minutes that he has gotten. All right, before we hop into the next question, I do just want to remind you real quick about the best way to shop online for great deals on IU basketball and football tickets. Remember the URL iutickets.shop. It will take you right to SeatGeek, where you can immediately find the best deals on IU basketball tickets, other sports tickets, concert tickets, and more. And as a bonus, you can use the promo code ASSEMBLY to get $20 off your first purchase. And when you use that URL, iutickets.shop, we actually get paid a commission for referring you, so it's a great way to support the show. I just went and looked at the IU listing. There are some really, really good seats available for Marquette, for UT Arlington, for UC Davis, some of these games coming up, and really reasonable prices. I mean, you can get main concourse seats for Marquette, pretty much center court for $40, $50. So if you want to get in there, see a really good game, see Romeo live, see all the rest of the guys, there are really some good options on SeatGeek right now. So when you do that, use the SeatGeek app, or you can use the URL iutickets.shop, and it will take you right there to the IU listings page on SeatGeek.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on here with this mailbag. We got this question from Scott. He says, knowing how conservative Archie is with managing player fouls, did you notice he put Finney back into the Chicago State game in the first half after picking up 2 fouls? I did notice that. Do you think this has more to do with his trust in Robert Finney as a true freshman, philosophy change, the opponent, or a combination of all of the above? Probably all of the above. I think Archie has a pretty extensive track record of being a guy who likes to sit players that get 2 fouls. That is his, philosophy. So in a game like that, let's remember, Rob got the 2 fouls really early in the first half. And even Archie, when a guy has gotten 2 fouls really, really early, will sometimes put that guy back in, because obviously you run the risk if a guy gets 2 fouls in the first 5 minutes and he doesn't play at all the rest of the half, what you might gain in that extra time where he doesn't pick up the 3rd foul, you might lose in him just losing the rhythm of the game and getting out of sync and his muscles getting cold just sitting over there on the sidelines. So, it sometimes is a little bit different when that guy gets the first couple of fouls in the first 5 minutes, as opposed to if maybe the second foul comes at like the 11-minute mark or something like that. So I think that probably had something to do with it. It certainly might have been an opportunity to see how Rob would react to that situation when he gets put back into the game in a low-pressure situation. Because, if he comes right back in and picks up 3 fouls and fouls out of the game, you're still going to beat Chicago State by 40 points. So, low-pressure situation, give him an opportunity. He is a guy who is showing that he's a tough physical defender, even from the point guard position. So he needs those reps, learning how to still play good defense without being able to foul. And, it would be interesting to see now that we have a little bit more depth. And really, I guess that could go one of 2 ways. You could think, well, if Rob let's leave Rob out there. And if he gets in foul trouble, we've got Devontae, we've got Al, we've got other guys. So on the one hand, it could make Archie more liberal in playing a guy with more fouls. Or you can say, okay, he's got these 2 fouls. Let's sit him down because we know Al can take care of this. And let's just make sure no one gets in bigger foul trouble. Like, either way, given Archie's history, it would seem to suggest that he would go the more conservative route. But I think in a situation like that, you had a couple things playing into it that probably led to him wanting to get Rob back out there earlier in the first half. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Ken Palm has a cool new stat now where they track that, and you can see, kind of what percentage of minutes guys that have 2 fouls end up playing in the first half. So that'll be interesting to follow here as we move forward and see if Archie decides to do something different with this team that is much deeper than teams he has had in the past. Next question is from JD. What happens in the bizarro world where the timelines worked out? So Ohio State hired Archie Miller and Indiana hired Chris Holtmann. Would last year have been any different? Would expectation change from now going forward? I think it's hard to say anything would have been different last year. I think the two things that Ohio State had going for them last year is Chris Holtmann took over and obviously had a much more successful first season than Archie in terms of wins and losses, were system continuity and Keita Bates-Diop, coming back, a 5-star guy that ended up being Big Ten Player of the Year. If Archie had gone to Ohio State, he would have been playing a different system. So Ohio State would have had to adjust to the new system. So maybe they wouldn't have hit the ground running quite in the same way that the Buckeyes did under Chris Holtmann, but he would have had Keita Bates-Diop. And so I think he would have been in better shape. The Indiana roster that he inherited certainly didn't have that at the beginning of the year. It took Juwan Morgan a little while to become Juwan Morgan, and even Juwan, as good as he was last year, probably wasn't as impactful as Keita was. And then, the rest of Indiana's roster didn't quite have the talent that Ohio State's did, and you had, again, the switching system. So, I think it might have been a little bit different, but not a ton. And in terms of expectations now going forward, I don't think the expectations would be any different. I mean, I think Fred Glass kind of laid out the expectations before Archie was hired. And so whoever came into Indiana was going to have those expectations. And Chris Holtmann is clearly recruiting well, doing a really good job. There's, would he have been able to get Romeo? I don't know. Would he already have Trace Jackson Davis and Keon Brooks locked up? We have no way of knowing. But I think those would be the same expectations. And I think Chris and Archie are both really good coaches. I think they both would have fit at Indiana or Ohio State. And what's great about that is that I think Indiana-Ohio State is one of the most underrated rivalries in the Big Ten, really nationally, because when it's going well and Indiana-Ohio State are both really good, it is intense. It's a great rivalry. It's a rivalry on the recruiting trail. It's, good basketball games. Man, I remember, growing up in the early 90s, those were some epic games. Jimmy Jackson and Treg Lee and Jamie Skelton and all those guys, and I'm forgetting some of them. Ricky Dudley played basketball for a little while. Those were some great games, and so I'm really looking forward to that being a rivalry moving forward between those two. It'll be fun. Mark says, I'm going to circle back to a question that I asked you and Alex. It's Alex Bozich, my co-host on Podcast on the Brink, earlier this recruiting season. Did Archie pivot too quickly to only focusing on 5-star kids and box IU into an all-or-nothing situation? Should we have prioritized a Justin Smith, Race Thompson, or Jerome Hunter type player to assure we did not have a fairly empty class? So to that, I would say we did prioritize a Justin Smith, Race Thompson. Well, look, we have Armon Franklin, who I think is going to be a really good player. Maybe he doesn't. I get what the question is saying. Justin Smith, Race Thompson, Jerome Hunter were guys ranked between 50th and 80th, kind of in there, like high 4-star type prospects. Armon Franklin doesn't profile that way. He profiles more as a low 4-star, high 3-star guy. So, so maybe that doesn't really fit there. But I think it was smart to prioritize an in-state guy like an Armon Franklin, make sure that you got him, so that you've kind of got that floor, that foundation laid for the recruiting class. Now, the issue, of course, has been that you had these two incredible 5-star talents, Trace Jackson Davis and Keon Brooks, that just like you did with Romeo Langford, you were going to go all in on those guys. And when you just look at the scholarship numbers, this class projects to be a smaller one. It projects to be a 3-man class because Fitzer and Morgan are gone for sure. Romeo Langford, almost assuredly, gone for sure. And then, whether you want to project another scholarship there because of, the likelihood of a transfer, not that any individual is likely to transfer, just that it's college basketball and it's a pretty good bet that teams are going to have transfers, maybe it's a 4-man class. So it has been exceedingly clear that Indiana has been making Trace Jackson Davis and Keon Brooks a priority, and that you're going to hold scholarships for those guys as long as you need to. That can't make it easy to go out and recruit other guys in, like a Justin Smith, Race Thompson, or Jerome Hunter, who are going to be recruited by really good schools when you can't make them a priority. Even to get those guys, you've got to make them a priority. Now, sometimes they'll wait and see what kind of opportunities open up at maybe bigger schools, that kind of thing. But it's a little bit, I think this question really requires the context of the situation to answer. Did Archie pivot too quickly to focusing on 5-star kids? No, because these 2 5-star kids are in your backyard, and by all accounts, you're leading for Trace Jackson Davis, and by almost all accounts, it's between you and Kentucky for Keon Brooks. So you've got to wait. You've got to be patient. You've got to give those guys time. And yes, the risk of doing that is that if they end up choosing to go elsewhere, you could be left in the spring with, Armand Franklin and a couple of open scholarships and not the kind of options that you would like. But in this situation, when these guys are right in your backyard and you've got a good chance at getting them, you've got the long-term relationship with Trace, you've got the relationship with Keon Brooks' dad, with Ed Schilling, going back to him coaching him in college, like you've got to go all in on those guys. And so I guess all I'm saying is you can't just expect a Justin Smith or a Jerome Hunter level recruit to say, okay, I'll wait forever to see what those guys do. That's just, I think, kind of the reality of the recruiting game. So I think Archie and his staff made the right decision to prioritize Chase and Keon. It's a risk-reward type scenario, and I think you take the risk given the reward. And if you don't get one or both of those guys, now you're looking to see what opens up in the spring. You're looking to see if anybody's going to transfer, either graduate or just kind of the normal transfer route. Or you have to go with guys that might have been your C or D options, but at least you swung for the fences. And if Indiana's going to get back to hanging banners and doing the kinds of things we want Indiana to do, they're going to have to swing for fences, especially with guys in their backyard. Now, if they were going, if we're talking about maybe Matt Hurt and Trendon Watford, and Indiana was putting all their eggs in that basket, 2 guys that aren't in state and that you maybe didn't have as good of an opportunity to get, now maybe this is a little bit more of a discussion. But I really can't fault Archie for and the staff for what they chose to do here. And let's remember that just because Trace and Keon are waiting a little bit, it doesn't mean they're for sure committing elsewhere. It's easy to get a little disappointed, easy to get a little bit impatient, but I think Indiana's still in a good position with both of those guys. And if one or both of them end up coming, Indiana's strategy, their thought process is going to end up being proven to have been the right one. And I think either way, the process is what's important, and I think their process was the right one here. Ben says, what type of role early on, excuse me, I had something in my throat, do you envision for a guy like Race Thompson, who has the potential to add significant value to the rotation, but is coming off an injury that's kept him sidelined for the first week of the season? So this question came in before the Montana State game. Now we've gotten to see Race play, not a ton, and not against the kind of competition that we want to see him play against. But, my main observation about him was that he was a much more fluid athlete than I thought. I thought he ran well. I thought he moved well. We know he's a guy dating back to his high school days that has a good face-up game. So, especially after listening to Archie talk about him, being a guy who likes to mix it up and do those kinds of things, I guess that was kind of the vision that I had formed in my head, that he was just more of like a, tough bruising guy down low, and kind of forgotten what we'd seen, watching him play in high school. But that was a good reminder that this guy's he's a decent athlete, and can move around. So I think he's a guy that you could steal minutes with at the 5 if you need to defensively, because I think he's going to be able to play that type of defense. And offensively, because he can face up, he can play in lineups with Juwan Morgan and with Justin Smith, who do some of their best work around the basket. Juwan still does his best work posting up. Justin Smith still does his best work, working from the short corner, finding opportunities to dive to the basket, get offensive rebound offense. And so you don't necessarily want a guy like Race clogging up the lane. And I think because of what he does offensively, he can do that. So I think I don't envision him being a starter, but I do think he's going to be a rotation player as the season plays on, especially since Deron Davis probably isn't going to be able to give you more than 10 or 15 minutes a game. And so, we're still going to have to see Race play more. We have to see if his shot is reliable enough this year to be an offensive weapon. If it's not, then I think he's a guy that's going to play more spot minutes and will get more minutes in games where guys get in foul trouble. if he can step out there and knock down a 15-foot jump shot or even knock down three-pointers, now he's a guy that really, I think, figures strongly into the rotation, especially, when you're playing teams like a Michigan State and you're going to need more guys down low. So encouraged by what I saw from him against Montana State, but now, as with all the guys, we've just got to see him play against better competition to see what his role will be more clearly moving forward. Alrighty, thank you for being here and listening to the Mailbag. Let's move on here. Coming up on the Assembly Call, it is time for our Big Ten Roundup with Mike DeCourcy from BTN and the Sporting News. He will provide his impressions of Indiana's performances through these first two games and discuss the rest of the Big Ten. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All righty. Hello there to everybody watching on YouTube. Let me open up the page so I can see the chat. And Mike is here. Excellent. So let me pop him on. I don't know where Ryan was today. Let me get Mike on here, and we will talk about the Big Ten. Okay. Yeah, I don't know, Brian. I don't know where Ryan was. He was. I thought he was supposed to be here, but I don't know. Maybe he's mad at me for for my comments the other night. I hope not, but we will see. We will see. I haven't heard from him, so I'm hoping he's back. Okay, Mike is here. Here we go.
Okay.
How's it going, Mike?
I'm good, Jerod. How are you?
I am doing well. Did you have something over the camera on your laptop?
Yeah, I keep it off. I keep it over there just in case.
That is a smart. I've heard enough podcasts scaring me about that and how they'll hackers can take over your camera without you even knowing about it and without the light even going on.
That's why I started doing that.
It is very wise. Very wise. All right, we ready to talk Big Ten?
I am, absolutely.
Did you see the Sagarin ratings have Nebraska ranked number 1?
I did see that because if Tim hadn't tweeted about it, I would have missed that. But he's great. He's the best. He is such a clever guy. So it's good to see them doing well because it's good to have him in the league.
It is. I like Tim Miles. He's funny. And Indiana was 9th in the Sagarin rating, so maybe we just need to go by the Sagarin ratings.
There you go.
I'd be down with that. All right, I'll hit record and we will get going here.
Okay.
Welcome back to Banner Monday. Each week here in our second segment, we zoom out to take a look at how things are going across the Big Ten Conference, and there is no one better to provide insight on Big Ten basketball than Mike DeCourcy, who covers Big Ten hoops for BTN in addition to his columns for the Sporting News. Mike, welcome back to Banner Monday.
It's great to be here, Jerod.
You and I were just talking about how the Sagarin ratings came out, and Indiana was ranked 9th, which was nice to see, in Nebraska, number 1 over Duke in the early season Sagarin ratings, which is a great boon to the Big Ten's reputation here early in the season.
The best part about that was Tim Miles tweeting out, "Finally, there's a computer that gets us." Tim is priceless. He is so much fun, and so when they're good, he has a lot of fun with it. The game is supposed to be fun, and he is a clever guy with a great sense of humor. And I think the Huskers have done well in the opening week. I think they need to expand their sphere of influence. I don't know. They don't need to have more players. They need to have more players playing well. They've got 4 guys that are playing off the charts. That's no surprise. But that 5th, 6th, 7th spot has to solidify for them to be an outstanding team.
Well, maybe let's start there. Instead of starting with IU, let's start with the Big Ten. A few weeks back, you gave us your kind of power rankings, your top 4 heading into the season. What are your current Big Ten top 4 power rankings, and has anything changed since the preseason based on what we've seen so far?
I don't think there's any reason to change based on the first week. They've all won. Michigan, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Nebraska. They've all won, and so it's hard to say. I think that I would have very little surprise if they changed significantly. by the end of the week because Michigan's got to go to Villanova. That's going to be a very difficult game for them. This is not the same Villanova team that beat them in the championship game, but it's not the same Michigan team either. So we'll see what happens there. And then you have Wisconsin going to Xavier on Monday night, and that's a difficult game. So some challenges for those teams. And Indiana has been terrific right now, and as promising as you would want them to be. I mean, they've done everything in public that you would want them to do. It's just that it hasn't been against the greatest opposition. I'm not saying that the other four beat great teams either, but actually, I am incorrect. Michigan State did lose. We all saw that in the Champions Classic. But they played really well in the second half, and after really struggling early, they got it together. So I'm not going to move them off that line because they lost to one of the 2-3 best teams in the country. If they were expected to be one of the 2 or 3 best teams, or if they had been the one overall on my ranking when we first talked, I might move them. But I think they're still pretty much in the same place as where they were before they lost that game.
Oh, would Indiana be right about 5th?
Easy. I mean, they'd be 4A. The 3, 4, 5 to me has always been among those three really close, and those three have not been that far removed from 1 and 2. I think those 5 teams are the ones with the most potential in the league, and it wouldn't surprise me if any one of them won the conference. And again, my concern about Indiana going into the year was one position. And because it's the most important position, that's why I had them at 5. If they had that position covered, and then maybe who's going to be the wing, who's going to be, I wouldn't have been as concerned, and maybe would have had them closer to 2 or 3.
Well, what's interesting about that, you talk about that position, the point guard position, what I'm assuming that you're referring to. And, one of the biggest storylines coming out of the Chicago State game and the Montana State game has been the play of Rob Phinisee, Indiana's freshman point guard who started, now we don't know if he started because Devontae was hurt or if that's what was going to happen anyway in game 1. But what have been your early impressions of Rob Phinisee so far?
I've liked him. He's been very solid and making the right play, making the play, not trying to do anything too difficult. And that's what you need from that position on this team. I mean, you don't need a guy to make difficult plays. You've got 2 guys who can make difficult plays. Maybe 3 if Smith is, maybe just turns it up a little bit more. I mean, you've got 2 guys who are really skilled, high-level basketball players, 2 of the best in the Big Ten. So you don't need that point guard to do difficult things. And situationally, maybe you might say, you might have Jawan off, and you might have the other guys not playing well, and you might need the point guard to turn things up. But as this team's constructed, this point guard needs to not turn over the basketball, make open shots, and get the ball to where the playmakers are. And I think that Rob showed in the first 2 games a great ability to do that. Devontae, lesser extent, he turned the ball over a little bit too much, especially given the opposition, and didn't make shots at the level you'd want. Maybe tried a few too many difficult shots. Again, you don't need that from this position. There might be some games when Romeo's not playing well and Jawan's not playing well that you might want Devontae to try to amp things up a little bit. But overall, holding that position down, whoever ends up in that spot, the things that I mentioned are all the first items for that position. And I left out one, which is you got to guard your man too. And that's where Devontae has an edge, going into this season over Rob. And that's where both or either and all of their teammates will be tested on Wednesday night.
Well, let's talk about Wednesday night. Marquette's coming in. We know they have an elite offense, and they have one of the best players in the country, certainly one of the best shooters in Marcus Howard. What are the keys for Indiana to win this game against Marquette?
Well, I think the first thing is you have to defend the perimeter generally. They are an elite 3-point shooting team. Now, to this point, Sam Hauser and Marcus Howard have been the ones who've taken almost all of their 3-point shots. But they have other guys who are threats. Joey Hauser can make shots. Those guys they have 2 or 3 other guys who have shot 40% or so to this point, but on very low attempts. So but there's those guys that, if you spend all your attention on Sam Hauser and Marcus Howard, and then you let the other guys open as a result of that, they have guys who can stick you. So you've got to defend the perimeter generally really well. And then, secondarily, you have to contain Marcus Howard. I mean, he had 7 in his college career. He's had 7 30-plus point games, one last week, and a 50-pointer, and they included in that collection a 52-pointer a year ago. I mean, he can absolutely go off. And so whoever is checking him, and that's, it's going to be an interesting matchup for Indiana. Whether, do they try to go big on him? Do they try to just stick with the conventional matchup of whoever is point guard, whether it's Devontae or Robert or somebody else? Do you stick with that? That will be interesting. I still remember this, and this is one of the reasons why I'm not opposed to going bigger on him, but I think it's better to do that as an emergency. I remember in the 2006 NCAA championship game when Taurean Green was playing point guard for Florida, and they had better players at every other position, but Taurean was the whole key. If you shut him down, Florida was in trouble because they didn't have another way to get going. And Cedric Bozeman for UCLA, great defensive player, one of the best defensive players in the country. And Ben Howland built his entire game plan around Cedric Bozeman taking out Taurean Green. And 3 trips down, Green went bang, bang, bang. I think it was 2 threes and a 2 that maybe got to the lane. I can't remember exactly. But he just wrecked Ben Howland's whole day and a half worth of work, and UCLA had no chance after that. So better to keep that in reserve to go bigger in that matchup. And start the game trying out whoever you believe is the right point guard for that game. Start the game trying out with him guarding him, and then if you need to, move on from there.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. I mean, I was just looking at their roster, and because I was thinking, okay, maybe you put a Romeo or a Zach McRoberts on him to bother him with length, but then you look at the rest of their roster, it's 6'5", so that's 6'7". I mean, that's the other reason is they've got some size that if you do that, now you're going to have to guard somebody else with a Rob or a Devontae and give up some size there. So it will be interesting to see what they do there. It kind of strikes me when you look at the profile of this team. It's kind of like seeing an Archie Miller Indiana team play an old Tom Crean Indiana team. The way that they can shoot and kind of space the floor. Are they defending any better? Because I know that was a big problem for them last year.
Well, they have to this point, but again, some of that comes from level of opposition. I mean, I went back when Iowa started their season off with a good defensive effort, 37% by their first opponent, and so that's a good start. But then I look back a year ago, and their first couple of opponents were shooting in the 30s because of who they were. So I think it's too early. I think Wednesday night we find out, are they defending better? Because they've got to deal with Romeo, and they've got to deal with Juwan, and they've got to deal with Smith, and they've got to deal with a lot of guys who can make baskets. And Devontae is a guy who can create his own shot. He's just got to do a little better job of it than he has in the first 2 games. And so then we'll know whether they can defend better. Deron Davis, if he can get in there and get inside and get some touches in the post. It's nice to see him back last week.
Yeah.
And so that Indiana has a lot of different ways, a lot of different guys that can score. And, that's one of the things that off the first 2 games that I'd like to see Juwan a little bit more actively involved in the offense. Again, I think that's probably situational. He didn't have to play as many minutes. He didn't have to do as much. But I want, when they start to play real teams, and that starts on Wednesday, you want to see him become more involved in the offense because of what he can present.
So looking around the conference, what players and teams around the conference this past week caught your eye?
Well, I'd say the first team that caught my eye was Rutgers. Excuse me. Eugene Omoyori playing terrifically, averaging 19 points a game. Rutgers has 6 guys averaging in double figures. So that's, again, it's all early and it's not great opposition for anybody. I mean, they were, Drexel and Fairleigh Dickinson, the kind of teams that you would expect to beat. However, those, having Omoyori step forward into some pretty big vacancies. Rutgers lost, they were not an elite team by any stretch a year ago. And then they lose, multiple highly contributing players. So they needed some guys to step forward. And we all know Geo Baker I mean, it started at his first game as a freshman, basically. So we know about him, and we know he'll be a good player. But for Omiori to play as well as he has, and for them to have 6 guys averaging in double figures, I think was a real step forward. The other team I thought played pretty well was Purdue. And one of the reasons for that is because Purdue had to fight. Ball State, a pretty good MAC team, one that I don't know that they're on Buffalo's level, but it's a good, solid MAC team that will contend for the first division in that league. They had to struggle to beat them, but they did, and they pulled away late. Matt Harms played well, is playing well on offense. And then of Carson Edwards. Now, I mean, as I said earlier in one of our earlier discussions, I mean, they were dumping the whole truckload of responsibility onto Carson Edwards and how would he handle it. And to date, he's been outstanding. I mean, 26.5 points in average over the 2 games, has shot the basketball pretty well. Not necessarily did not shoot the ball well against Ball State from 3-point range, but still managed. Even I think he went 2 of 10 from 3 and still managed to go like 12 of 22. So I mean, he was making almost everything he took from 2-point range. So I like where they started out, but I think over these next 2 weeks, 3 weeks really, when you count the start of the conference play, you've got a lot of teams involved in the multi-team tournaments, and then you've got the ACC Big Ten Challenge, and then you've got the start of league play. And we will know more about the Big Ten and its hierarchy by the first week of December than probably any other conference will know about their leagues.
Well, when it comes to that Purdue win, you never take for granted those wins against in-state schools, because they can, as we learned last year,
not me.
They can come get you. So that's, you look at that score, you might not think a lot of it, but I guarantee you all Indiana fans nodded and, impressed with Purdue being able to get that win like they did, because that's not always an easy one to get. So, we've had a lot of games this first week where, as we've mentioned, we don't really know what to take from them. The competition ratchets up in a big way. Indiana playing Marquette and going on the road against Arkansas, 2 really good games. What other games around the conference should we really pay attention to kind of give us a sign about, particular teams and how good they may or may not be?
Well, for those people going to Assembly Hall, and I'm going to be one of them, the challenge will be how much of the Michigan-Villanova game can we catch? I think that's really interesting. The 2 teams that played in the championship game last year, an opportunity to see them rematched. I think that's a very important game for the 2 teams. I don't think that it's decisive for the conference, certainly, because if you lose a road game at Villanova, I mean, that's kind of what you're expected to do. But if Michigan could get that one, and I think it's going to be an interesting game because Michigan played a really strong defensive game in their second outing, and that does need to be who they are. They were not clicking on offense. I mean, they went into full 1976 Pittsburgh Steelers mode on that in the second half of that one, and really did well defensively and were able to turn that game around. Villanova's obviously not the challenge that they were a year ago when they had 4 first-round picks, I think, in their lineup, but it's still a great group. Phil Booth has played really well to this point. Eric Pascal's been a great player in his career. They've got some very good young players. Colin Gillespie's played well so far. Didn't get a chance to play a ton last year, not because he wasn't good enough yet, but because the guy in front of him was the National Player of the Year. So Jalen Brunson. So Colin Gillespie's got a chance to show he's a really capable player and is going to have a nice career now that he's able to be in the rotation. So big game there. And then I think the other game that's really interesting is St. John's. Again, I believe that game's at Rutgers. St. John's plays Rutgers as another Gavitt Games matchup. And St. John's came in with a lot of expectations, a lot of high hopes with some transfers and with Shamari Pons back. Obviously Mustafa Heron coming in from Alabama, somebody they were pretty excited about getting. But they've got, Rutgers is a team that will play tough. Steve Pikiell, just a terrific basketball coach and a great hire for Rutgers. And changing the culture at Rutgers is been a challenge because it's not so much the players that you have to change, but getting guys to believe that Rutgers is a basketball school to an extent. After all the years that they have struggled as a program. That's, changing that mentality as you go out and recruit is a real effort. So this would be an opportunity for him to really make a statement, and for the Knights to really make a statement against the St. John's team that I think came into the year believing they could make the NCAA tournament and hasn't played great to date. But again, they have a chance to turn their season in the right direction if they're able to beat Rutgers.
Last question for you. What is your favorite part about seeing games at Simon Scott Assembly Hall?
Well, I think that the arena crowd is one of the best in college basketball. I would put them up there with just about anybody. The atmosphere, the facility, the history of Allen Fieldhouse goes back a few decades before Assembly Hall. So it has that, and Assembly Hall, as it's constructed, does not have quite the same charm as Allen does, because that old time gym feel that you get if you go to Allen Fieldhouse. But when the Hoosiers play, I believe that's as good a home court advantage as there is in college basketball, and we've seen that because of how they've either beaten or challenged teams that were more talented over the last couple of years. For instance, last year, they really put a scare into a lot of very good Big Ten teams at Assembly Hall because of how good the crowd was. They went and beat the 2017 national champion in November of 2016 when Carolina came in. It's a great home court advantage, and I do love seeing the impact that home crowd, that enthusiasm can have on a visiting team. You like to see when you're a writer, when you're a journalist, you want to see the things that are unusual, that are different, that are special. And I think the crowd at Assembly Hall is really special. And I'm not making that up, because if I were talking, and I'm doing a show in Louisville tomorrow afternoon, and if they asked me the question, best crowds, I would tell them, that in terms of home court advantage, I would give it to Indiana over pretty much everybody.
Absolutely. Follow him on Twitter at TSN Mike. Mike, we always appreciate your visits on Mondays. Thank you for your insight on the Hoosiers and the Big Ten.
Thanks very much, Jerod. I'll look forward to next week.
Absolutely. All righty, coming up, it is time for another edition of Basketball 201 with Ben Ladner. We're going to talk a little bit more about the packline defense defending the three-point line, plus look at how Indiana worked offensively against Montana State's zone. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All right.
Okay.
Good stuff, Mike.
Great, Jerod.
Have fun on Wednesday night.
Thanks.
I hope it's. I'm sure the place will be crazy. The first two crowds have been a little underwhelming from people who have been there, but it's also the 299th and 345th ranked opponents that we've been facing. So willing to I bet it's going to be pretty crazy on Wednesday night.
I would imagine they'd get jacked for that one.
Yes. Excellent. Well, we will talk to you next Monday. Thank you, Mike.
That's great, Jerod. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty. By the way, I have an update here on Ryan, and this is totally my fault. I'm a moron. He completely told me about this, as he often does. Let me see if I can find the drop real quick.
I was in Maui.
Yeah, he's in Maui. I forgot he's in Hawaii. No cell phone reception, middle of the rainforest. He told me this last week. I knew I needed to find a replacement, and then lost in the hubbub and the excitement over the season starting, I completely forgot about it. So that's where Ryan was. Not his fault at all. All my fault. That's where we are. Okay. Let me bring Ben in so we can do some Basketball 201. Excited about this, as always. Mr. Ladner. Oh, I need to unmute you real quick.
Yeah. Be right back.
Okay. We've got some Andy Bottoms level darkness going on here with Ben shut. We got to work on the lighting. I think he's probably getting that right now. There we go. A little bit better.
Had to turn some lights on.
There, I was gonna say that's like Andy level darkness. Sweet. All right, so let's open up with James's question. We'll hit that, and then how many videos do you have about zone offense?
I've got up to 4, but we don't need to use all of them.
Nice. No, that'll be good. So let's use as many of them as we can get through.
Cool.
And let's rock and roll here. All right. Here we go. By the way, really good job on the post-game email.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Do you know if there's like an archive of those, like where I can find them? I mean, I've got it saved as a Word doc on my computer, obviously, so I have it, but just to like see what it looks like and everything.
Oh, you mean you just want this one, not like old ones to go back through?
Yeah, just like or I guess I'll probably subscribe to the email itself as well. But
oh, well, yeah,
yeah,
do that. But no, I'll forward it over to you just so you have it.
Okay, cool.
Yep. Okay, here we go. Welcome back to Banner Monday. Here at the Assembly Call, we don't just want to make you a smarter IU basketball fan. We want to make you a smarter basketball fan, period. And that is the purpose of our weekly Basketball 201 segments with Ben Ladner. Ben is a senior at IU. He's our joint intern between the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall, has been doing a great job with these Basketball 201 segments. Lots and lots of positive comments every week for your work, Ben. And we've got another interesting one prepared. So thanks for being here again. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm happy to do it.
Before we hop into this, just real quick, your overall impressions of Indiana so far through a couple of regular season games.
They've looked good, obviously. Hard to take too much away from games against Chicago State and Montana State, but I guess the two things that jump out to me is that when they move the ball, Indiana can get pretty much whatever shot they want, and a lot of that has to do with the quality of the opponent, obviously, but and I'm sure against Marquette, it will not be so easy as simply, one pass and a dribble drive to get to the basket. But I mean, something we'll touch on in the episode today was just that ball movement. When they get that ball hopping around, they've got so many smart ball movers on this team. And when they really move it with purpose and with aggression, without hesitation, they can bend the defense out of shape and get pretty much whatever shot they want. And then the second thing is transitioning defense to offense. This has been a point of emphasis for Archie Miller, for the players, for pretty much everyone all season long, is they really want their defense to fuel their offense. It's not going to be a team that shoots a lot of threes. It's not going to be a team that just jacks up a bunch of jump shots all the time. They want to get to the basket. They want to get to the foul line. They want layups and dunks. And one of the best ways to do that is to score in transition. And one of the best ways to do that is to force a lot of turnovers with ball pressure and using your length to get in passing lanes and running out, getting points on the fast break. And so through two games, they've done a really nice job of that. They've got a lot of really, really long defenders and athletic guys on this team. And so they get a bunch of runouts. They get a bunch of kind of semi-transition, good looks to the basket, a lot of basket cuts. So those are the two things that have really stuck out to me so far.
So we got last week in the Basketball 201 segment, we talked about the packline defense. And we got a question from James that I think is really interesting. So I'm going to read it. It's kind of a long question, but I feel like the entire question actually makes a pretty good point. So let's read this and let's talk a little bit about this. Obviously, how Indiana defends the three-point line is going to be really important against Marquette. And he brings up a few good points. So James says, I feel like one point still being missed in the is the pack line weak against the three discussion. How many consistently successful teams in college basketball have elite three-point shooting without generating open three-pointers first by drives to the basket or good passes to the paint? He says, I feel like this point was brought up by Galen last year when IU was giving up a ton of threes and people were complaining about the pack line, but a lot of those good shots were generated by really good ball movement and drives to the basket before the shot that the pack line should prevent if it is executed properly. He says, we mentioned this in the segment about pick and roll defense, but sometimes holes in the defense evolve so much over the course of the play and fans only fixate on the last shot or player. A lot of NBA teams like the Rockets generate open shots by James Harden driving and kicking, aside from stupidly good shooters like Steph Curry, and I suppose maybe Marcus Howard qualifies as a stupidly good shooter, maybe not to Steph's level, but aside from those guys literally bringing the ball up and occasionally jacking and making long threes, how much is the pack line at a disadvantage versus other defenses? The 2011-12 Hoosiers had truly great shooters, but they didn't get the open looks they really needed until Cody showed up to put to pull defensive pressure, and Vic could really glide to the hole, and obviously Yogi then, penetrating and kicking as well. So he wants to know if he's missing something. What do you think about what James said here, Ben?
I think all of that is true to some extent. The thing I would push back, or not push back against, but the counter argument I would make is that, you don't need 3, 4, 5, 6 passes in sequence to generate a three-pointer, right? Sometimes it can be, if you've got, let's say the guy has the ball up top, he beats his man off the dribble, and the guy one pass away is sagged down, or maybe he doesn't even beat his man off the dribble, but he's able to get inside the 3-point arc, and the guy one pass away is kind of sagging in a help position. Well, if you've got a capable 3-point shooter, not a you don't even need a great one. It can't be a bad one, but as a guy who can catch and shoot the ball, if you've got a decent 3-point shooter on that wing, that's just one pass away. It's right. It's one dribble, one kick, and a shot. It's also vulnerable, like we mentioned, against bigs that can shoot the ball. And then just against certain teams, you don't see this as much in college, but sometimes teams will use guards to set ball screens and then have them pop to the perimeter. And when you're hedging all those ball screens, then you're, like we said, we've touched on this a lot. You're bringing two guys out on the ball, way out on the floor, and putting your team at a momentary numbers disadvantage. And so you make that one quick swing pass, and it's an easy catch and shoot three. And then if the defense closes out on you, you just make it the next swing to the next guy, and he knocks down the shot. So, it triggers a lot of those long rotations. And I think it can lead the offense into making a lot of those long kind of swing sequences around the perimeter, like James is talking about. But the main thing is just the other four defenders that aren't guarding the ball are just kind of sagging off their guys. And the purpose of that obviously is to prevent penetration into the middle. But, sometimes you don't have to get the ball all the way into the heart of the defense and then kick it out. It can just be kind of that short drive and then a quick kick to a three. And in those situations, when you're sagging off of that shooter, it's a longer closeout. And in a lot of cases, it's a more open shot.
It was interesting at Montana State. At least once or twice, we saw one of those cross court passes that got a wide open three, and of course they bricked it because they just not good enough shooters to make it. But I thought about you in our segment talking about that.
Yeah.
As we approach this Marquette game, what word would you use to best describe your feeling about Indiana's defense heading into this? Are you more confident, curious, or concerned about Indiana's ability to defend the three against Marquette?
I'd say curious, just because we haven't seen them defend at a high level against a good team yet. And that's because they haven't played a good team yet. They've defended at a really high level, like an elite level in their first two games and three, if you count the scrimmage. They've held their opponent under I think it's 0.82 points per possession in all three of the games they've played. And that's a ridiculous mark. That's unbelievable. If they were to sustain that for the entire season, they would have the number one defense in the country. Mm-hmm. Obviously they won't do that in all likelihood because they'll play better teams. Not every team will be as cold as Montana State was on Friday night, but I think they've looked good. I think they're executing at a much higher level than they were this time last year. And even than they were at the end of last year. I just think, the whole defense has really taken a step up, and then they're starting from a better point now than they were this time a year ago. I think I mentioned this in one of my, kind of post-game notebooks from the Chicago State game, is that I just think the starting point for this defense is so much higher than it was a year ago that they don't have as much of a leap to make on defense. And so the learning curve won't be quite as drastic for them. That said, against a team like Marquette with some shooters, particularly Marcus Howard, who can do it off the catch and off the dribble, that's going to be a test. And, we'll see if they need to change up their defensive scheme at any point. I actually think hedging is not a bad strategy on ball screens against a guy like Marcus Howard because it stops him from just dribbling right into those pull-up threes. So, I think they're well equipped to handle this challenge. It's obviously a really close matchup rankings-wise. Marquette's 24-25, I think, and Indiana's just outside the top 25. So they're about even in the rankings. I think they're probably about even in talent, about even in preseason expectations, et cetera, et cetera. And so this will be a good test. I'm definitely not concerned, but I don't know that there's necessarily been a lot for me to take and say, okay, this is, a definitively good sign that will carry over through the entire season. So really, this is their first chance to prove themselves, I think.
All right, well, let's switch gears. Let's talk offense. You've got some videos prepared talking about how Indiana attacked Montana State. So let's go through this.
Montana State played a 2-3 zone for much of the game on Friday. They switched up to a man-to-man at certain portions of the game, but mostly they came out in a 2-3 and stayed that way for a lot of the game. Here we have a clip. This is the first play of the game. Indiana wins the tip. Bring the ball up with Robert Finney. We'll set the floor. We've got Romeo Langford here kind of at the top. Romeo Langford, is down here. This is Justin Smith up top. Zach McRoberts on the wing. Juwan Morgan at the high post. So Finney brings it up. Immediately recognized 2-3. They, in all likelihood, they knew that Montana State was going to come out in a 2-3. So they get into a set. Finney dumps it and comes. He's going to come back over to the weak side. And so they're basically trying to overload. They don't get it. But what they do, they just transition to kind of a swing sequence. And you can see Indiana just patiently swinging the ball around one man to the next. And then finally you get that skip pass. And when Finney skips it, you can see how the defenders, the guy on the wing here and then the elbow player are both fixated on Finney. They're loading up on him. This guy is shutting off Juwan Morgan, top defender shading towards Langford and Justin Smith in the high post here. Finney notices that, skip open to Zach McRoberts. Good closeout from Montana State, but two guys on the ball, right? So both of these players closed out onto McRoberts, and so obviously Indiana's going to have a numbers advantage there. And it's Justin Smith just finding this soft spot, kind of right at the free throw line. You can see number 5 here. I think this is Harold Frey. If he leaves Romeo Langford, this is a catch and shoot 3 for Romeo at the top. So instead, he kind of tries to split the difference between Langford and Justin Smith. But as would be the case with most defenders, he doesn't do it well enough. Smith steps in and just goes straight to the basket, and probably should get a better rotation from this guy at the bottom of the key. He should be on the midline. Right now, he's shaded way over toward Robert Finney. He's way too far to the weak side of the floor here. Mm-hmm. So Justin Smith, there's no help defense because the center is shaded on Juwan Morgan, taking away his post up, and Smith just steps right into that empty space and lays it up. And that was a theme all game long for Indiana. They were just able to, and Evan Fitzner does a really nice job of this as well. I might have a clip of him a little bit later, but IU just does a really good job, I thought, of finding those soft spots, granted, against a team that didn't really execute their zone all that well and is not the most talented team in the world, but I was impressed with the way they were patient on offense and just able to find those weak spots.
I feel like if we played against a 2-3 zone every game, Justin Smith would average 20 to 25 points. Like one of the things that has stood out to me that even from, he struggled early in his freshman year last year, but one of the things that really stood out even early on is he has really good vision in the zone. Yeah. Like he understands where to go. He understands where to cut. He's always making himself available. And, you saw right there, he makes himself available. He's got a wide open lane in there for the layup, but he really excels in zone offense. If only we could rewind to 2013 and have Justin Smith against Syracuse. Maybe that game goes differently, but that was really nice, and he continues to impress.
Well, and another thing I'll point out here too is from that clip, watch where Indiana's play once they kind of run this initial action. Look where their players are positioned. You've got Justin Smith in the short corner, Juwan Morgan at the high post, and these two bigs basically move in tandem. And you'll see throughout the possession they're kind of going to trade spots here as Morgan starts out in the high post, and then he kind of goes down, and right as he goes down to fill that short corner and try to get that seal, Justin Smith comes up. So they're basically, and this is something that you teach at the high school level, at the middle school level, it's kind of basics of going against a zone defense, but you need to have these two big guys, at least in most zone offenses, kind of moving opposite one another. So you kind of have this triangle made up of, or I guess it's more of a trapezoid, made up of the two high post spots and the two short corner spots. And these two guys basically just move from one spot to the next and kind of cycling around as the ball moves around, each guy kind of, like I mentioned, picking those spots, trying to find where there might be openings in the defense. And so on this possession and in the other clips I'll show, they did a really nice job of moving in those spots and finding the weak points.
Indiana would seem like the kind of team that you would want to play zone against until we prove that we can consistently knock down threes. But right. Do you think that because of how good Juwan and Justin and Evan and even Deron at times can be playing against a zone because of just their IQs and their ability to pass, do you think that could keep teams from playing zone because those guys are so good?
It could. I think most teams, if they would load up on those guys, I think, until Indiana proves they can hit shots at a high rate. And so, but, I think in theory, you've got some good shooters on this team. And Archie Miller said this isn't really a team that aspires to shoot a lot of threes, but, if they get open ones and they're catch and shoot looks and they're good shots, they're going to take them. And you have guys like Romeo Langford, Robert Finney, who's shown some nice touch from the 3-point line. I think even Justin Smith could step out and hit some shots this year. Zach McRoberts has improved his jump shot. Fitzner, all guys who can kind of step out behind the line and hit shots if they're left open. And so, and one thing in the Montana State game was that Juwan Morgan was drawing a lot of attention, and he was the guy that made a lot of these plays possible, not just because of his scoring and passing, but just because of his gravity in the post. He was so dominant in the first half that Montana State had to pay a lot of attention to him. And then when he drew two defenders, there was a wide open cutting lane on the backside or something like that. And they were just kind of able to waltz into the lane.
Yep. All right. Next video. That's good stuff.
So the next one, it's actually the very next possession of the game. It's kind of same setup here. Robert Finney crosses half court, Justin Smith, McRoberts, Romeo Langford, Juwan Morgan, basically all in the same places. They're running the exact same set. They'll get McRoberts cycling through here. Romeo brings it to the top. And same kind of thing, just kind of, they look for this kind of flare screen action, but it's not there. And so Finney does a nice job just swinging it right back out. Romeo Langford started this game really looking to set guys up. I think if this is later in the game, maybe he tries to create something off the dribble here, get into the heart of the defense, or maybe step into a three here. But because it's a minute into the game, he's just kind of taking his time, being patient. Indiana swinging it across the court. Finney looks for the drive. It's not there. And this is why you move the ball against a zone, is because you get it moving. You kind of work it around. I mean, just look how much these side to side ball movement sequences, they make the defense move around so much. And especially when you're at the top trying to fight around screens, look how much these top guys are moving. And then when on Finney's drive, Juwan Morgan cuts down to the short corner. And this guy, number 20 right here, who's following Morgan, is actually supposed to be up here on the right side of the top of the zone. But because this kind of bottom wing guy goes up with Finney, both these defenders kind of follow up to the top. And Juwan Morgan just slips to open space. And you can watch Justin Smith. He's going to cut up to the free throw line and bring this defender with him. So there's no help defense around here. I don't know if that was intentional by Smith or not. Either way, it's a nice play that generates a lot of space. Romeo Langford, a good passer, is able to find Morgan. And it's just a lob over the top for a layup. I mean, easy pickings for Indiana. And again, it's just out of moving the ball against the zone, getting that defense in motion, making it move, bending it out of shape until finally some crease forms and you're able to find an opening.
That is why it's frustrating when you watch a team play zone offense and they come down one pass, chuck a three. Like, granted, if you make it, okay, that's fine. And actually, we saw Indiana do this toward the end of the first half against Montana State. They started taking some early threes. You don't get that movement. And, not that you always want to, take the ball down to, 30 seconds, 5 seconds left in the shot clock, but you do want to be patient for exactly the reason that you just explained. Now, against a more disciplined zone defense, maybe you don't see, something that wide open, but it's certainly much more likely, work at a few passes, get the defense moving, and then, you're more likely to have something like that open up for a real easy bucket or a better
State
three-pointer.
Left two on the ball a lot during that game. And what I mean by that is when, that like a skip pass, like I showed in that first clip, when two guys close out on the ball, one of them is supposed to stay on the ball and the other is supposed to retreat back to his spot. Montana State didn't really do that. They seemed like they weren't super comfortable playing the zone. It's early in the year. Maybe it's not, I don't know what their base defense normally is, but maybe it's not a 2-3, but they left two on the ball a lot. And because of that, they had guys out of position, not where they're supposed to be. And Indiana just went to the spots where those defenders should have been, but there was no one there. And so they were able to get easy baskets. Next clip here. Also from the first half, another early possession. Montana State came out of this 2-3 later in the first half, which is why a lot of these clips are from early in the game. But it's the same kind of thing. You see Justin Smith cycle through here to the wing. And so you're basically playing 4 out around Juwan Morgan. Finney is going to cut through. And they try to get this pick and roll for Romeo Langford and Juwan Morgan, but it's not really there. And so, again, just being patient, swinging the ball around. Smith looks for the shot. Notice how on all of these catches, they're facing the basket. They're looking to shoot the ball if it's there. They're not just, taking it and immediately whipping it back. They're looking for options, kind of surveying the floor. And when they're there, they take what's given to them. So they get it into the high post. Justin Smith's going to cut through the lane to the opposite side here and takes two defenders with him. Zach McRoberts is open here. Good recognition here from Frey on Montana State to know that McRoberts is going to be open, tags Smith, and then closes back out on McRoberts. But it sets up the drive and kick. So McRoberts goes back out to Romeo Langford, gets right into the middle of the defense, and that's when it's cooked. If you can get in between these two top guys, and in this case, it's, again, Montana State's defense is shifted way to the right side of the floor. So if you can get kind of into this foul line area, and especially with this big man stationed in the short corner, that's when you can get a lot of really nice looks. And so Langford, maybe the best off the dribble player Indiana has, into Justin Smith, and it's another easy layup.
Yeah, and again, just really good recognition by Justin, a good cut, and making himself available when the opportunity is there. Good stuff.
Yeah.
I have to imagine, it's like you said, Romeo, those first couple possessions, just kind of feeling it out. It kind of seems like the way that he likes to approach things, and then as he starts to get more comfortable, he really starts to attack. So,
yeah.
and we saw that there because he draws so much attention, and he's just so slithery, the way that he moves, because he moves faster than he looks because of those strides, and he can just get into those little gaps, and he's such a good passer too. So I think that's something that we'll see a lot of this year.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of Chris Paul. Like what he used to do when he was with the Clippers was like everyone knew Chris Paul's the best player on the floor, but he didn't just come out of the gate and score 10 points in the first quarter. He could have, and Romeo Langford probably could too, but there's value in kind of setting up your teammates and getting the offense moving. And then towards the end of the game, you kind of have license to take over if you need to. Whereas if you just start out kind of doing everything yourself, it's not quite the same flow that you get on offense.
You get your guys involved. I mean,
exactly.
It's like Justin Smith is not going to create a lot of offense by himself. He creates offense with movement and cutting and vision, but he needs someone to set him up. And I mean, I thought he was great in the first half, and that gets him going. Yeah. Same with a guy like Zach McRoberts, who doesn't necessarily need offensive touches to get going, but that keeps him involved on that end. So I think smart players, at the level of a Romeo, like Chris Paul, like he talked about, understand that they can go get theirs whenever they want to, but you got to get everybody else involved because you're going to need them for the full 40 minutes.
Right.
So,
and I do think there's an emotional component to that as well. When a guy feels the ball, when he feels like he's part of the offense, maybe he fights harder over a screen on defense. Maybe he cuts harder to the basket if he feels like he's going to get the ball in that cut. Yep. Maybe he runs hard in transition to the corner and fills a spot there, rather than if he's not touching the ball, maybe he loafs back on defense. So I do think there are kind of these mental, emotional components to this as well.
I thought Juwan was a lot more engaged in the Montana State game, especially defensively, than he was in the Chicago State game. And I don't know how much of that has to do with exactly what you just said, getting involved offensively, but it can't hurt, so.
Yeah, and Juwan, especially in the first half, was really, really aggressive, 6 for 6 in the first half for 14 points. And we'll see a result of that on this play here where, he was so dominant in the post that by this point in the game, and really by midway through the first half, he had Montana State's full attention every time he posted up. And so here, again, 2-3 zone, moving the ball around the perimeter. Juwan Morgan tries to post up here on the strong side block, and watch how you'll see the top guy here, top weak side, top part of the zone is going to sag down into the paint off of Robert Finney, but he can't leave this zone entirely because he's got 2 on his side. Meanwhile, the bottom player on the weak side comes all the way over to the strong side and doubles this Juwan Morgan post up. So he has 2 feet outside the paint. Wow. And so you have basically this entire lane of space, and Romeo Langford quick to realize that, and they just go up top for the lob.
Has Romeo ever seen that much daylight on offense before?
This is a defensive breakdown because you have to account for Romeo Langford. You have to know that he's able to do this. But, consider the alternative, right? If he does it, let's say he cuts through and this player who's kind of at the midline on the weak side, basically the only player on the weak side, if he comes down to bump Langford and take away this cut, then it's Rob Finney wide open for 3. And he'd already hit a couple threes by this point in the game. And so you're kind of in this lose-lose situation. And it's because, like I said, Finney's hit some shots, but also because if you single cover Juwan Morgan in the post and you let him catch the ball in this position where he's really comfortable and can make plays, then he's just going to go to work and torch your defense anyway. And so you devote more attention to him, and then you leave basically a 1-on-2 on the weak side, and one of these 2 guys is going to get the ball. On this play, it happened to be Langford, but it very well could have been Finney. And you can see Finney here actually pointing to Langford, saying he's wide open, throw the lob. And Devontae Green sees it right away up top, and just a gorgeous play. One of 2 nice dunks from Romeo in that second half.
Yeah, great vision by Devontae and a great delivery on the pass too, which is necessary there. So that was a great play. And again, as we've said, 1,000 times last week, the competition is not good, but it's nice to see what's nice to see is the process, some of the fundamental movements, like just the guys kind of getting into rhythm. This is not just individual talent and length and speed taking over. This is guys looking like they kind of know a little bit what they're doing, and it's still early, it's still uneven. Archie's talked about the chemistry of the offense not quite being there, but certainly in those clips you see a team that seems to be functioning, kind of five guys all doing the same thing, which early in the season is not something to take for granted. You combine that with Indiana's talent, they're going to be able to get some things done on offense. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you said, it's just, do you understand the principles? Do you know what you're doing? Do you look comfortable executing what you want to do against those better teams? Romeo Langford can drive by his man and get to the basket against any bad team, and so if it's all that, if that's all they're doing, if it's just Juwan Morgan backing people down in the post, then it raises the question, how effective is that going to be against Duke or Marquette or Louisville or any number of, quality conference opponents that they're going to see? But when they're moving the ball, when they're cutting, when they're finding guys, playing out of the right spots on offense, that's when you start to think, okay, this is actually a system that they're running. This is something that could be effective against a team with any degree of talent, basically. And so, they're not going to win every game. They're not going to destroy every opponent like they did in those two games to open the season. But, you can see the philosophies, you can see the system in place. And I think that's an encouraging sign, because this time last year, there just wasn't really that same comfort level on either end of the floor. No, not at all. All right. Well, good stuff as always, Ben. Follow him on Twitter at @BLadner_, correct? That's it. Yep. And Ben wrote the post-game email for the Montana State game, did a great job. He'll be writing some more of those this year. And I guess, we probably shouldn't tease anything for next week, because we probably want to see what happens in the Marquette and Arkansas games. I think, it's nice to, kind of go over some big picture conceptual stuff like we did with the packline. But as some folks mentioned in the chat mob, it's really nice being able to watch our own team, watch our own guys do this. So maybe we'll just wait and see what storylines pop up in Marquette and Arkansas, and then just kind of follow that for what we talk about next week. Works for me. Cool. All righty. Coming up next, it is time for our opponent preview segment. Indiana faces Marquette on Wednesday. Josh Wilson from the Inside Out podcast is here to teach us a little bit more about the Golden Eagles and their potential All-American guard Marcus Howard. So stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All right. Nice. Good stuff, Ben. Thanks. Very good stuff. All right. It's going to be a fun game on Wednesday night. Yeah, I'm going to be in the studio for it, unfortunately. Oh, are you? Yeah, I got to board op that one. Which, man. I'll do like some halftime commentary and like have the game up on my laptop and stuff, but yeah, I will not be in the building. Which you drew the short straw for that one? We didn't even draw straws. The straws were drawn for us, and I had no say in which straws were mine or what length they were. So, yeah, it's Marquette and Wisconsin, unfortunately. Oh man, and I initially had Michigan too. So all three of those games at home, I was going to board out, but I got out of the Michigan one. So nice. It's a tough shake, but it is what it is. It is. Well, cool, man. Well, thank you. I'll talk to you on Slack. Talk to you then. All right. See you, Ben. All right, and let's bring in here for our final segment our buddy Josh Wilson. Let me unmute you. What is going on, Josh? Hey, how are you doing, Jerod? Doing well, man. Did you have that microphone last time, or is that a new mic? I did not. It's the new one that came in last week, so I hope it sounds better. And oh yeah, it sounds really good. I'm official now, so that's awesome. That is awesome. Okay. So obviously we've spent a decent amount of time talking about Marquette here, but we can go over them in a little bit more depth. Do you have a particular way that you want to structure it? No, it's all up to you. I mean, there's a lot of good stats on these guys. There's a specific way that they play. So okay. Indiana is really going to be challenged for sure. Okay. Well, let's hit that up. And then we can talk about style of play, and then we can go into some of the stats, and we'll probably keep this. It's 4:15, so we'll keep this to about 12, 13 minutes or so. Good deal. All right, let me hit record and let's roll. And actually, in the chat mob, if you have specific questions you want us to answer, put those here too, if we haven't answered them yet. Chad says that you look a little too formal for Assembly Call. That's late lunch. I'm at the finance office I manage, so I'd wear Indiana gear if I could. Yeah, usually, Ryan's got a sweatshirt on. I pretty much wear the same shirt every day. I try to wear this shirt every Monday. They're going to start looking at me funny at my daughter's preschool. Why does he wear the same shirt every day? What's going on with him? All right, here we go. Welcome back to Banner Monday. Each week here in our final segment, we preview Indiana's upcoming opponent for that week. So obviously this week Indiana is facing Marquette and Arkansas, but since we have an episode of Assembly Call Radio before the Arkansas game, we will wait to talk about them. Probably talk about them some on the post-game show of the Marquette game too. So let's focus here on the Marquette game. That is coming up on Wednesday, and to do that, we have Josh Wilson, a member of the Chat Mob and a host of the Inside Out podcast, here to give us some insight on the Golden Eagles. Josh, thanks for being here. Always
Yeah,
good to have
thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me again. So I always love being a part of the show any way that I can.
So we were just talking before the segment started about, and we've kind of talked about this some with Mike DeCourcy and with Ben a little bit too, about how the style of play that Marquette is going to bring into Simon Scott Assembly Hall is really going to challenge Indiana. So let's start there. What is this style of play, and what in particular is going to make this such a challenge for IU?
Well, Marquette's pretty well predicated on drive and kick, and it's all flown through Marcus Howard. They're big time point guard. He dribbles. He's very ball dominant, and so he dribbles a lot, and he tries to get into the paint and kick, or he'll find a way to get his own shot. So they like to get up and down the floor pretty quickly. So Indiana, transition both ways, offense and defense, is going to have to be solid. But I think with the defense that we've seen so far, it's got to be encouraging, but that's going to be tested early and quite often Wednesday night. So they're going to have to be ready to, get back, send, one, maybe two guys to the boards and have two or three drop back in transition defense. Just to, you need to slow this team down and make them run their offense. You don't want them to get into a flow of things.
So Howard, are most of his 3-pointers off the dribble, or is he getting a lot of catch and shoot opportunities?
I was able to watch them Saturday, and most of the opportunities that I saw were off the dribble. He kind of created his own. He is able to catch and shoot. That certainly is a skill of his, but he just got hot Saturday, and Bethune-Cookman's actually a decent team. At least they had a decent team last year. But he just got hot and he went berserk. He went 7 of 10. I know the first game he went 2 of 12. So he obviously had a rough first game of the season, but he got hot, and watching him play, he almost reminds me of Carson Edwards, just how ball dominant he is and the way he finds his shots. So I think it's kind of a interesting comparison, but that's the first person that came to my mind watching him play. So it's definitely, a matchup that Indiana fans need to focus on. And, I've been curious. I've been trying to think of the different ways that Archie is going to deploy his defense at Howard, who exactly is going to get the start on him, and who's going to rotate, on and off of him throughout the game.
How does he compare to, for people who haven't seen him play, how does he compare to Yogi? Because they're about the same size. Yogi was,
right,
obviously ball dominant, got a lot of shots off the dribble as well.
Yeah.
Is there any comparison there?
There is, actually, now that you bring that up. I guess the Carson Edwards, I was just trying to think of people that I'm going to see later in the year that Indiana's going to have to guard. But yeah, I mean, he pounds the ball. I guess if, you're not a basketball player, he dribbles really hard, but he's got great control of it. And he's about 5'11". He's quick, and he's got kind of a good. You remember how Yogi always used to drive left and do the step back three? That's what Marcus Howard does. I've seen him do it on several occasions. So he's not quite as built as Yogi, but he moves in the same manner.
And his numbers are terrifying. As a freshman, he shot 54.7% from three-point range, which was first in the country. Last year, he only shot 40.4%. And obviously this year he's had one really good game, one really bad game. But, all told, he's at 40.9%.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, he is the clear star. And it's going to be really hard for Indiana if he has one of his 30-point games, or, he had a 50-point game before. Is this as simple as make life tough on him, he has a tough shooting game, and you win the game? Or do they have enough around him that they can kind of compensate for that?
Well, they do have good players around him. The Hauser brothers, Sam, and I believe it's Joey. Joey Hauser. So they're both about 6'7", 6'8". They can shoot the ball well. The shooting guard's name is Sakar Anim. He's not as much. He's not very fluent from the outside. He's kind of more of their bulldog type player. But they have capable shooters, and they move well in sequence together. But I do think if you can make it tough on Marcus Howard, you give yourself a great chance to win the game, just simply because they go as he goes. I mean, they got good players around him, but I think if you can make life tough on him, Indiana's going to have as good a shot as winning that game, because he scored 15 points in the opener and Sam Hauser scored 15 points. But other than that, I don't think there were very many people in double digits. There's only 2 guys that average double digits so far in the year. He averages 26. Obviously, he had a 37-point game on Saturday, but Sam Hauser averages 12.5, and everybody else is under 10. So I think if you can really limit him, you're going to give yourself a good shot.
So clearly, we understand what about Marquette is going to pose a big challenge for Indiana and their defense. Where are the issues for Marquette that Indiana can really take advantage of?
Well, so far they've been turnover prone. They're averaging right around 17 or 18 turnovers a game. So I think that's got to be promising just with Indiana's defense. If they can force turnovers and get down and out on the floor, it's going to, be really good for Indiana to kind of get some blood flowing, get some shots going down. Hopefully that'll help them out. But Indiana is going to be much quicker than Marquette in most positions, and they're going to be a little bit longer. So I think the athleticism, the length, and the speed, all things that Archie loves and he knows he has a lot of, they can take advantage of that, because Marquette's they do have size, but I don't think they have as much as athletic size as Indiana does. So pressure defense, if you can get them to turn the ball over, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for Indiana to get easy buckets, which always helps at home against a ranked opponent with a dominant point guard.
Yeah, boy, they've really turned the ball over a lot. They're turning it over on 22.4% of their possessions so far. In fairness, last year, because they've played, I think the 2 teams they've played this year, UMBC is 244th, Bethune-Cookman is 303rd. So, not great competition. Last year, they only turned it over 17.3% of possession. So that was top 100. So it'll be interesting to see. Maybe that's a 2-game blip, or maybe that's just an issue for them this season. The other thing that hasn't borne itself out in the numbers so far this year, but was a big issue for them last year, is they were not good at keeping teams off the free throw line. They were 289th in the country in free throw rate, meaning they really put their opposition on the line a lot. And they also didn't defend 2-point field goals very well. They gave up the 304th highest 2-point field goal percentage. And, that would seem to play right into what Indiana wants to do based on what we've seen the first couple of games and what Archie has talked about, wanting to really attack the paint. Now, you might laugh and snicker and say, yeah, well, if they put us on the free throw line and we're only going to make 50% of our free throws, well, we're all hoping that that's still going to improve. But that would seem to me like what you would want to probe early on, kind of like they did against Montana State, is play through Juwan, especially early on, and basically challenge Marquette to prove that they're better at defending the post than they were last year, because they were not good at it at all last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something Indiana's going to have to do. Is there's not, from what I saw, now, albeit it's been 2 games and I got to watch the one on Saturday, there's really not a lot of great depth on this team. Yeah. Theo John, I believe, is their starting center. I think the backup, if you remember Ed Morrow from Nebraska, he transferred into Marquette. So
that's why that name sounds familiar.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, he played it. Yeah, he played it in Nebraska. But there's just not a lot of quality depth. You got the Hauser brothers, and then the Theo John, Ed Morrow, and then Sakara Neem's in the backcourt with Marcus Howard. But I just didn't see a lot of quality depth off the bench for them. So if you make them guard you, and you can get, if you can get Marcus Howard in foul trouble or one of their bigs, then you take away one of their weapons. And Indiana's depth's going to come in such, it's going to be a great asset this year. So I think they really have to attack. They got to get to the rim. I think the free throw shooting is going to come around. There's going to be a lot of excitement in the building. Marquette's probably going to play man-to-man defense, so there should be a better flow to the game. So I think, get to the rim, test them early, see how they're going to guard you, and, find your matchup that you can take advantage of.
Marquette last year, just a couple more numbers, they were not a very good rebounding team. They were sub 200 on both ends from a rebounding perspective. But, elite three-point shooting-wise, they were 3rd in the country last year. So far this year, they're only, 105th. But, again, really tough to read too much into the numbers. I guess that's really the other big key, for this weekend or for this game is how improved are they defensively? Because, correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like I think they're going to make some shots. They're going to make some threes. Indiana's been holding opponents, down. They're not going to hold them to 55 points. Like, Marquette's going to score some points. Mm-hmm. But I think Indiana will play pretty well. They only scored 67 against UMBC, so it's not like they're, just an unstoppable offense.
Right.
But I I kind of feel like we pose more questions for their defense than they pose for ours, I guess, is the way that I look at it. And so I think that they'll get theirs and they'll make some threes, but I really feel like they're going to have a harder time dealing with everything we can do than we are dealing with the different things they can do.
Right. And that's where that length and athleticism is going to come in. If you make Howard and that, the Hauser brothers take difficult shots, they're going to hit a couple. I mean, they're top level college athletes. It's going to happen. But if you can challenge all of their shots and not give up wide open looks and, just make life difficult, then you're going to give yourself a good chance, because if you make them work on the offensive end, that's just twice the energy that they have to exert on the defensive end. And that's where depth comes into play. That's where the speed for Indiana comes into play. So you start to slowly wear them down. And I think that's going to be a factor. Indiana needs to make it a factor. But you got to challenge their shots on defense. If they get open looks, they're not going to knock them down. I mean, they're good shooters. If you challenge them, you're going to set yourself up really well.
So do you want to, we're kind of getting comfortable with this segment with how we want to do it. Do you want to offer a prediction? Do you want to, kind of say what you think is most likely to happen in the game on Wednesday night?
Yeah, final prediction wise?
Yeah, sure. Let's put you on the spot.
Well, and I'm just trying to think with the offensive, what Indiana's going to do. I think I'll go 72-64 Hoosiers, because I think just the way the defenses look for IU, Marquette did have a good scoring game, but Marcus Howard got hot, and then Bethune-Cookman, once they got down, it's just kind of a free-for-all almost. But I think if their defense shows up to play and, they do kind of some of the things that we've talked about, they can hold Marquette in check. So I can see it mid-70s to high to low 60s, kind of in that range. I'll go 72-64 Hoosiers.
What do we know about their toughness, right? Like, because when I've looked at this team, they've kind of reminded me of one of the old Tom Crean Indiana teams, where it's like, they've got this really good point guard. They can really shoot it. Like, if things go well and they're shooting, it probably looks beautiful and they can beat anybody on any given night. But if it doesn't, ... And the answer for Indiana was, if we're not making the threes, we really have nothing else to fall back on. And especially on the road, we pretty much are not going to have a chance. I haven't seen them enough to know if that's a fair comparison at all, even though I've made it a couple of times. But is this a team that projects to be kind of mentally tough and is going to be in it for a 40-minute fight, even if they can't make threes? Or is it going to be as simple as, if they're not making those shots and Indiana, pushes them out of the first thing they want to do offensively, they just have no chance? Do we know?
I think that I wish I do. I was looking at the box score of the UMBC game, and I really wish I could have watched that game, because Marcus Howard took a lot of shots. And watching him Saturday, it almost seems like he's going to try to get his, irregardless if he's scoring or not scoring. It's almost like if he's missing, he's going to keep trying to find it, until he makes one, just with the way the box score looked like. So there's not, let's see, because he's a junior, I believe. Yeah, he's a junior. So they have a couple seniors, but I didn't really see them play a lot of minutes.
Yeah, they're 224th in experience, according to Ken Palm. So yeah, they've got him, the junior, Joey Hauser's a freshman, Theo John a sophomore, Sam Hauser a junior. So I mean, they don't have anybody else who is more than a role player, according to Ken Palm. So a guy that uses 20% or more of possessions, that is an upperclassman, other than Marcus Howard.
Yeah. So that's going to be the interesting thing, is because, the Big East is a good conference, but how many atmospheres do you walk into and it's Assembly Hall, especially when the crowd's rocking? I mean, Marquette's going to be a ranked team, and what it's like in Assembly Hall when ranked teams come into play. So I'll be eager to see how they handle that. But I think if you can get under their skin, they probably get flustered a little bit, because you're going to start speeding up Marcus Howard, and maybe he's going to feel a little more pressure to try to score more. And that's always a good thing for the defense, because then he starts losing sight of his teammates. And so you hope you can do that up by speeding him up. But put some pressure on him, and I'd love to see if we can break him a little bit.
All right, last question. Charles in the chat, over under on Tom Crean mentions during the game. Alex France has set it at 7.5. Over under.
Ooh. I'll go over, because I wanted to call this the Tom Crean Bowl. So,
see, I'm going to go under. It obviously would have been, obviously if Tom Crean was still coaching, it would have been. But, I don't know. I think it'll be a big storyline early on, but then the style that Indiana plays is just so much different from how they were playing under Tom Crean. I think the Tom Crean comparisons will fade away quickly.
Yeah, hope so.
And we had some great wins under Tom Crean. I don't necessarily mean that as a negative, although I do enjoy Archie's style more. But I'm just saying.
One thing to look for, though, and I've been thinking about this all weekend, is who gets the matchup on Marcus Howard first. Do you put Fennessy on him? Do you put Langford or McRoberts on him? Because Langford is quick. He's long. He's longer. Him and Fennessy are about the same size. And, Rob's obviously built, and he's quick enough to stay with him. I'm curious to see who starts on Howard.
I am, too. I would imagine that they'll start it, straight up, meaning Robert Fennessy plays him. In part, just because that seems like Archie's type thing. Like, we're just going to go play defense the way we play defense. No gimmicks here. Also because they have length, so you're going to kind of need Romeo and Zach's length on some of the other guys. But what I wouldn't be surprised to do would be, maybe every third or fourth possession, you run Zach or Romeo at him and just give him a different look. Any shooter, you get into a comfort zone. It makes life easier. And if you go down knowing what to expect, who's going to be guarding you, and he's a junior. Rob is a really good defensive player so far, but there's going to be things Marcus Howard can do to take advantage of Rob's inexperience.
Absolutely.
Same thing with, Devontae, can tend to get a little over exuberant. So I would play it straight up, but then just try to maybe switch up who's guarding him and give him a few different looks to keep him off balance. But, we'll see. Hopefully they don't need to do that because just playing it straight up works well enough.
Hopefully not.
But if he gets in rhythm, what I hate to see is when a shooter gets in rhythm and you don't try different stuff. Try some stuff, get him out of rhythm. Do Ben mentioned really hedge the ball screen so he can't just dribble into those 3-pointers. Do some things to get him out of a rhythm because if he gets in rhythm, it's going to make things tough. That's for sure.
Could be. Yeah, you got to make him work. That's how you're going to win that game is make him work for everything.
Yep. All right, Josh. Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for the preview, man. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. I always love it.
For sure. Listen to the show Inside Out. What's the Twitter account for the podcast again?
It's inside_outpod. That's I always get I get the underscore misplaced. It's inside_outpod.
Pod. Okay.
Yep.
There we go. Listen to that. And that'll do it for us on this week's edition of Banner Monday. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, join us at assemblycall.com on Monday afternoons for the live broadcast of our Banner Monday recording. And you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter, which will make you a smarter and more well-informed IU basketball fan. Thank you for listening. We'll be back to talk IU hoops again with you after IU Marquette Wednesday night. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim. And go Hoosiers.
Thank you.
All right, I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you. All right, good stuff. Got a little out of rhythm there with my read. Didn't quite match up with the music like it usually does.
That's all right. I love that soundboard. Those drops are awesome.
My only issue with it is if I focus too much on that, it takes me out of the conversation. So I try not to do them as much during the post-game show. For radio shows, I can somewhat plan like which ones might work in a certain segment. It's going to be a little bit harder to use them on post-game shows, but it is they are fun.
Yeah, those are awesome. The cheese curd one with Coach, and then can a brother get some coupons?
Can a brother get some coupons?
Yeah. That's awesome.
Beer, cheese curds, and music. It doesn't get any better.
By the way, speaking of beer, cheese curds, and music, happy birthday to Coach. And happy birthday to Ben Malcolmson as well.
Two great men who represent Indiana basketball.
Absolutely. Happy birthday to both you guys. And now we got a long day to power through, and then we got IU Marquette on Wednesday night. I cannot wait.
Yeah, it's going to be rocking. I won't get to make it to that game. The next game I'll be down for Northwestern and Louisville are the next two games I'll be at. So,
man, it's interesting. I'll be interested to see what the attendance is. I mean, I have to think it'll be a packed house and crazy, but there's a lot of tickets available on StubHub for cheaper price than I would have thought for the Marquette game.
Yeah, I saw that. That's odd. I saw somebody said there was over 17,200 at the last game against Montana State. It did look a little more full. There was a good crowd for Chicago State. It's better than I thought. It's just as long as there's interaction and there's investment, because from a player perspective, just the effect that fans and an atmosphere like that have on a team, you can't put a price on it.
Yeah.
So
no, I have to think it'll be. I feel like Hoosier Nation has kind of been waiting for an opportunity to erupt. You know, I mean, so hopefully that's what we see Wednesday night, first big game, high profile moment. Let's be ready for it.
I'm sure it'll be rocking. So,
all right, man. Well, thank you for being here, and we will talk to you all on Wednesday night after IU Marquette.
Yes, sir. We'll see you then.
See you, everybody.